If anyone can show me one example in the history of the world of a single psychic who's been able to prove under reasonable experimental conditions that they are able to read minds. And if anyone can show me one example in the history of the world of a single astrologer who's been able to prove under reasonable experimental conditions that they can predict future human events by interpreting celestial signs. And if anyone can show me one example in the history of the world of a single homeopathic practitioner who's been able to prove under reasonable experimental conditions that solutions made up of infinitely tiny particles of good stuff dissolved repeatedly into relatively huge quantities of water have a consistently higher medicinal value than a similarly administered placebo. And if anyone can show me one example in the history of the world of a single spiritual person who's been able to show either empirically or logically the existence of a higher power with any consciousness or interest in the human race, or ability to punish or reward humans for their moral choices, or that there is any reason other than fear to believe in any version of an afterlife, I will give you my piano, one of my legs, and my wife.
Hello and welcome to Reason. Today is Sunday, January 22nd, and this episode is
entitled You're There.
I am.
How you doing?
This episode is entitled We Are Both Pro-Life and Pro-Choice. The question is whether or not abortion should stay legal. I'm Joshua Billingsley, along with Paul Whitmire.
How you doing?
And this podcast is coming to you from sunny Buffalo, New York, live as always. Reason Podcast is a weekly discussion of events, current and historical, from a skeptical, rational, and non-theological perspective. Reason Podcast is brought to you by The Offensive Atheists and the Atheist Community of Buffalo and Western New York. For further information, please visit our blog and website at wnyatheist.org or email us at reason@wnyatheist.org.
Having a Life versus Being Alive is a paper written by a Thomasine Kusher at I guess that's how you pronounce that, at the University of Department of Psychiatry, University of Miami, and it was published in the Journal of Medical Ethics. So I think Thomasine is what you name a daughter when you wanted to name them Thomas.
Yes. I also knew a Thomasella, I think.
Thomasella, really?
Yes.
I think these are terrible. But at any rate, okay, so this paper is a discussion of some of the issues surrounding abortion and the moral implications therein. So the author discusses that modern medical science has taken the perspective, first we started off by saying that a heartbeat constituted life, lung function constituted life, pulse, blood pressure, things like that. And as medicine kind of advanced, they kind of hit this brick wall of life. A determination as to whether or not a being is alive is at least currently, entirely brain death or brain activity. Mm-hmm. So, and now you're completely gone.
Okay. How about now? This may be a punishment for our almighty creator who has decided to taunt and torment me and all the technology which supports my rage against the hypocrisies of pseudoscience and religiosity.
Well, we had no technical problems last week. So
we're going to make up for it this time?
Yeah, it's going to be a fun show. Okay.
All right, fantastic.
So anyway, brain death, brain life, brain activity. The author posits that if we make the determination currently as to whether or not a human being is alive by a determination of brain activity, then we could make the same determination as to whether or not a fetus is alive. And in order for
this actually seems pretty reasonable.
In order for there to be brain activity, number one, there would have to be a brain.
Also a reasonable premise,
which is formed in the 8th week of gestation. The beginnings of the neural connections start to form in the 8th week of gestation, according to the author of this paper. And so this paper and a lot of what Josh and I are going to talk about tonight is there's this huge gulf that exists between the pro-life people and the pro-choice people. And especially since this is the 39th anniversary of Roe versus Wade, Facebook has just been rife with things on both sides of this. People have just generally been talking about this. And the thing that keeps coming up is the pro-life position is, you amoral, disgusting bastards, you're killing babies. And the pro-choice position, seems to boil down to, we don't think they're babies. We don't think that they're life forms, complete and whole life forms. And so there's where the difference comes in. And the funny thing about that is the pro-life side just keeps shouting about how the pro-choice side is amoral. Like that they know that they're killing babies and they just don't care.
Yeah, that's the one that bothers me, is that they seem to believe that everyone universally accepts these are babies. And you have decided, you pro-life people, pro-choice people, have decided to kill babies.
Right, exactly. So, and that's what the heart of this paper gets to, is a discussion of having a life versus being alive. Now, the author kind of breaks it down into going back to the, kind of Greek language roots of these things. Zoo, where zoology comes from, is being alive in a biological sense, according to the author, whereas bios is to have a life.
Sure.
And the distinction that the author is making is that a fetus, at least, if we're talking about prior to brain development, the first 8 weeks of gestation, a fetus is a bundle of cells. Those cells are active, are functioning, are going through metabolic processes, and therefore fall under the definition of life according to the idea of bios, but not under the zoological definition.
All right.
And the difference there is that without a functioning brain, the fetus cannot have any of the psychological attributes necessary to make it a human being who is the subject of a life. Only gradually in fetal and infant development does he or she acquire the characteristics of personhood. The process of becoming a person is a lengthy one, and even at birth, the infant has only some of the necessary psychological attributes, such as desires, wants, frustrations, and feelings. So this paper is trying to do a kind of middle ground thing here, which, there's really not too much middle ground in the whole abortion thing.
No, there's about none.
And this paper is really trying to say, like, okay, so any moral objection just goes out the window if you're talking about an abortion within the first 8 weeks of gestation. That's a bundle of cells. There aren't even neurons to form neural connections. After 8 weeks, well, it starts to get a little bit more gray. And as the process goes along, it gets, I guess less and less ambiguous and more towards the side of you should not kill the unborn child.
Well, let me just clarify. The basic idea is that before 8 weeks, not really gray.
Right.
This is not a human. This is not a person. This is a bundle of cellular matter.
Yes, much like you could be talking about skin cells or your fingernails.
Right. So then after 8 weeks, well, then there's the possibility of consideration. We start thinking there may be some kind of neural activity. This being may begin to exist. And then progressively as time goes on, it becomes more certain to a point of, again, where you can be born and actually exist. The preemies, the premature births,
right?
Those are actually people, and that's a solid color on the other side. So we've got one side is solid, and this is all about that gray area.
Right, absolutely. And so the author comes up with these three conclusions regarding how it should function according to this perspective of zoological life versus biological life and blah, blah, blah. And that's a little, not really fleshed out clear in the paper what the differences in the two categories are. I think they really chose it because they wanted the title, which happens a lot, especially in psychology papers. But okay, so conclusion number one. Abortion, I was not criticizing a secondary side.
You really were.
Point number one.
Yes.
Conclusion number one. That abortions prior to the development of a brain capable of consciousness are not morally objectionable. Okay.
I actually, that seems fairly reasonable.
conclusion number 2, that if there is going to be an abortion after this stage, it should be performed as early as possible, not just for reasons of medical prudence, but also from a moral perspective. And point number 3, that people will need reasons of increasing moral strength to justify abortion as the fetus develops. The further the pregnancy continues, the stronger their reasons would have to be in order to terminate it. So this is, again, just kind of clarifying the position that I think a lot of the pro-choice people have, which is this. I don't know the figures, and I know you did a bunch of research on it, Josh, but the number of abortions that take place. Did you actually come across any studies breaking down the number of abortions that take place in the first trimester, second trimester, and third trimester?
88% of abortions occur within the first trimester. That's the one I know off the top of my head, and if you give me a moment, I can actually grab my notes and have better numbers for you.
Right. Well, I think, that kind of just makes the point as it is. It's like 88% are occurring within the first 12 weeks, which is not the first 8 weeks, but it is within that window. That first 8 weeks exists within that window where most of the abortions are being done. And so the argument of this fetus being a cognizant life form is not really substantiated. I think the author does, again, try and put these precepts up and make this as something that would be considered in the standards of medical ethics. But I don't think that this actually comes up in medical ethics as much as it should. It certainly is not something that is being debated in the, very coherent and organized pro-life versus pro-choice debates that exist out there. So, I think it would behoove both sides to take a look at data like this and to ask the pro-life people the question.
If you're to interrupt you, Paul, I've actually got numbers.
Okay.
All right. Excuse me. It was 89% occurred at or under 12 weeks. 9% 13 to 19 weeks, and 1.5% at over 20 weeks. 64% of those reported were by vacuum aspiration, 6% by D&E, which I don't actually have a definition for real handy, and 30% were medical. So actually, the vast majority of them are accidental. So bear with me 1 second.
I don't follow what you're saying there. First off, I have no idea what D&E is. Aspiration is one of the methods that
D&E is late-term abortion, or as they like to refer to it, partial birth abortion.
Oh,
and the only reason it's partial birth abortion is because there is a fetus, a thing which travels through the birth canal.
All right.
That's the only difference. It actually doesn't have anything to do with size or development or anything else. It's simply a type of abortion.
Yeah. Well, the whether it's the aspiration or any of the methods that are used, the pro-life people do really seem to enjoy putting up the horrible pictures of the disgusting images of fetuses that have been aborted and various things, and that's kind of basically an ad hominem argument. I mean, if you take a look at what it looks like when you cut a cancerous tumor out of somebody, it doesn't look appetizing either. And of course, that's something that nobody is saying should not occur. So a lot of the arguments on both sides of this are really coming from places of emotion, with the pro-life people under the constant position that the pro-choice people are killing babies and they're happy about it. So that was Having a Life versus Being Alive by Thomasine Kuchar from the University of Miami, as published in the Journal of Medical Ethics.
And moving on. Moving on to the fact that
that's two.
You can hear me because I can't hear myself, so we'll just continue on and assume that everything is fine. Moving on, the topic is abortion. Call in with your questions, comments, and concerns. The number is 424-243-9589. Also, there is a chat room for the show at blogtalkradio.com. That's all one word, Blog Talk Radio. will be watching, so feel free to go in there and, type obscenities or any number of other things at us while we're on the air. It's a sportful thing to do.
Yeah, it'll be a good time. All right, so moving on to just kind of current events here. Again, we're struggling through technical difficulties, which is no surprise. But
oddly enough, let me say one more time for the record, it seems to be only my headphones and microphone that suffer technical difficulties, not Paul's. Paul who handles all the technical stuff. Coincidence? I'm just saying that, these facts are things which should be put out there, and people should know.
Maybe you should get better at setting up sound equipment.
Maybe I will. Neener. But on January 18th on January 19th of 2012, Gather News, which is it's an aggregating engine for news stories, had a story here: abortion rates higher where it is illegal. More reason for pro-lifers to give up. And the majority of it is pro-choice propaganda, and I identify propaganda on either side, so that's exactly what it is. What they do mention is the recent study that came out, and it crossed multiple borders. It's all first world countries, but I'll just go to it. The study concluded that abortion rates are high in areas where abortion is illegal. What's more, this study has also determined that nearly half of all abortions worldwide are conducted unsafely and in developing countries. And this actually contradicts the line that the pro-lifers have been putting out there, that the USA is responsible for the most abortions in the world, and that making abortion illegal is something which fairly potently, fairly powerfully curbs abortion. And truth be told, apparently worldwide it does not. Not even in the first world does it. And now Paul is fiddling with my equipment again, and I'm screaming at the top of my lungs. It could not be much louder in my headphones, but I'm going to try and continue on and persevere because I believe that this is a hazing. Paul is hazing me.
This is just lovely. This is going well. Okay.
Okay. That's about it for this one. I'm going to take a moment and try and adjust my sound system. Paul, if you want to continue for just a moment.
Sure, I'll just go ahead here. So the news article I found was from onenewsnow.com, and it is entitled "Dangerous Illegal Abortion Group." This is an article discussing two organizations, an organization called Women on Waves and an organization called Women on the Web. Women on Waves apparently is an organization that's doing two different things, or at least they were doing two different things until their boat sank. Number one, they had a boat, and they were taking women from countries where abortion is illegal, and they were doing abortions on the boat. And then the boat sank. So they kind of, yeah.
That's God's wrath for you there.
There's actually no report as to how or why the boat sank. And so being that this is an article declaring that they're a dangerous, illegal group, I'm curious as to how the boat sank. Okay. But, the second thing that they're doing is they're providing information to women in places where abortion is illegal, telling them that what words and phrases you can use to go into the doctor or to the pharmacist and get medication which would serve as something that would abort a fetus during a pregnancy. And they describe how the symptoms of miscarriage and an abortion with pills are exactly the same, and the doctor will not be able to see or test any evidence of an abortion as long as the pills have completely dissolved. So, well, I understand One News Now's criticism. I mean, this does seem kind of bad to be informing women as to what they can do to go out and basically perform a self-abortion illegally. So it's the problem is the reason why this is happening is because abortion is illegal. And if abortion was not illegal, then this wouldn't be an issue at all. So, which, I mean, it's kind of obviously the case.
That actually raises the question and leads into what I'm going to be talking about in just a little bit. Do they have a good reason to make abortion illegal?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a fair question. I know you have a bunch on that. I think one of the arguments that the pro-life people have always made that the pro-choice people have always made is that if you make abortion illegal, you're going to see an increase in deaths related to botched abortions, back alley abortions, and all kinds of medical problems, just like there were all kinds of medical problems way back before Roe v. Wade was passed.
Exactly. I mean, that's the only evidence that we have is what happened before. So now we can say that would happen after. I mean, that doesn't seem entirely unreasonable. Now that we have the morning after pill, but they seem to be against that as well.
Yeah.
So, they don't want to stop it, nip it in the bud, and they don't want to let you abort once you have found out the pregnancy has occurred. Mm-hmm. And they, of course, don't want to take care of the child after the child's born because, personal responsibility and all.
Well, yeah, it seems to, and
it's a lose-lose for everyone, unless those that practice abstinence.
Well, abstinence clearly is the best way to go, and clearly the most effective, at least with abstinence education and so on and so forth.
Don't put your penis in anything.
Nothing.
Right there you go. Problem solved.
Not
abstinence education. They should give me a medal. I should go on tours.
Not a vagina. Not a watermelon.
No, but definitely not a watermelon. You don't want those babies.
No, that's the abortion that would occur would be a horrible, horrible process. Okay, so that's one group, women on waves. And the other group is Women on the Web, which is an online medical abortion service. Yes, an online medical abortion. I'm not sure how that works.
I do not want the app for that.
What they do is they'll ship abortion pills to women who live in countries where abortion is illegal, and usually in third world countries where, according to the article, medical assistance is also limited. The article goes on to make the point is all we can do is educate women about how this is a bad thing, and it's only a matter of time before somebody dies because of these unsupervised medical practices that exist. Which, again, yeah, it's not a good plan. It's a terrible plan to just be shipping medication off to third world countries and, not having the proper medical supervision for these medical procedures is an absolute disaster. And it would be exactly where we, as America, we would be heading if we decided that we were going to make abortion illegal again.
Now, we get that stuff from Canada, but everybody knows the drugs that come from Canada are tainted.
Yeah.
I believe with mercury, and they cause autism.
Mercury.
I'm pretty confident this is what happens.
Maple syrup, too, I think.
And moose semen.
Yeah, Canada's big on moose semen. I don't know why.
That way, you use the commodities that you have readily at hand.
Yeah. Okay, so, that's some of what's going on in the news regarding abortion. The one thing I wanted to mention about your news article, Josh, is so you were talking about how it's the pro-choice propaganda to be that abortion rates are actually higher in places where abortions are more difficult to obtain.
No, that's the factuality that they found from actually studying it.
Okay.
In contradiction to the anti-abortion banner, which is that making abortion illegal will lower the number of abortions. They didn't talk about anything else, like the fact that where abortion is illegal is usually places that are run by religious fanatics or have no public education, that sort of thing, which are the kind of places where there's nothing really much to do worldwide aside from have the sex. And so they probably have more sex, which means that they end up with this. And since children are no longer a commodity in modern civilization, they're no longer farms or plantations. Yeah, children are a detriment. So these people are more likely to get an abortion. Also, there's religious stigma that comes along with premarital childbirth.
Right. And these are the exact same areas which are also highlighting the fact that you should not be using contraception, that you should not be practicing safe sex in any form except for abstinence.
You don't give them anything else to do. Oh, by the way, you take away all the drugs, so they can't even have a good time partying. Yeah. So there's no drugs, there's no TV. What do? Well, what would you do? You got to do something to pass the time. I'm just saying, something enjoyable.
Yeah.
You can just play touch football so long before.
I'd say that's probably true.
Yeah.
I can only play touch football for so long before I'm interested in having the sex.
Although in these parts of the world, it may be soccer.
Yeah,
or football.
But they do call it football.
They do, but they're not supposed to touch. So it's non-touch football.
See,
I believe.
Another example of the abstinence-only idea. It's in their sports, it's in their condoms, it's in their whole deal. That is their position.
And large portions of these areas are primarily Catholic, and the Catholics hate abortion, and they love procreation.
They really do.
Big on procreation. You have to be married. But even if you're not married, they still want that baby.
Yeah.
You still got to have that baby. Although you shouldn't be having that baby. But since you are, you have to.
Yeah, and if you do have the baby, you can give it to Catholic charities.
And they won't give it to the homosexuals.
And they won't give it to the gays.
That's right. They'll sooner shut down
Yeah.
their whole system rather than give anything to the gays, because they really hate the gays.
They really do. Yeah. So they're just to sum up, they have a system in place which prevents you from learning anything about any sort of sexual protection whatsoever, except for abstinence. They take away all the drugs and all the fun, and they basically leave you in an existence where the only thing you're going to do is have sex for fun. The condoms are gone. Any sort of birth control or contraception is gone. You're more likely to get pregnant. Abortion is removed as an option for most people in this situation. And then adoption, which is now being not so much an option, at least through Catholic charities, who have refused to participate in the government-funded adoption process because the government said you have to give babies to homosexual couples.
Oh, as a totally separate thing, and this is just something I recently heard about that doesn't directly apply, but it is. Let's just make fun of the Catholics' Day.
Sure.
The Catholics are discussing no longer providing health insurance to any of their employees.
Oh, yeah, I actually wrote a blog post on this.
Yeah. But they've reached the court decision. The court has ruled, and they have to, and now they're actually taking it fairly firmly. It's quite amusing that they really, really don't want abortion. Their argument is people that don't want abortion shouldn't be paying for them. And that's a complete misunderstanding of, actually it's a fairly good understanding of how insurance works. Everybody puts money into the pot, and when you need it, you take some of the money. That's insurance. So they don't want to have anybody paying for an abortion that doesn't want an abortion.
Yeah.
So they're not going to give health insurance. They're not going to give babies. They're not going to do anything that they disagree with. And they've cornered the market on charities for so long that they've never had anybody question them. This is throwing them off guard. They don't know what to do. They're just stopping doing things.
Right. And all of this, on top of all of this, is the fact that Christians are persecuted in America.
Yes, they are.
Okay.
Poor Christians. Persecuted minority is what they are.
Yeah, it's really the case. All right, we're gonna move on here. Talking about abortion, talking about a lot of the issues of pro-life versus pro-choice seem to come from the Christian versus secular community in America. But I wanted to take a moment and talk about something else. Something that's been annoying me very much recently. I spend my time, like you do, watching the YouTube videos, reading the Facebook things like that.
Sure, productive stuff, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's important to have a grasp on the world around us. Here's something that's I've been noticing. Either I don't know if it's more and more recently, or if it just happens to be where I'm stumbling. We really hate Islam, and we really hate the Muslims, and I do too. I think that the Muslim religion is as batshit crazy and ridiculous as every single other religion. Josh and I have made the point many, many times that, you don't get to laugh at Scientology when you believe that your zombie god rose from the dead 3 days after being hung from a tree. So you can't just pick and choose what you think is ridiculous and what is not. Now, but in America, there's plenty of videos of the general American perspective on Islam. I watched a video on YouTube talking about how any Muslims who come to America, this news guy decided he was going to go out and do a survey saying he was going to interview people, and he was going to say, do you think that Muslims who come to America should be required to have an ID card? Should they be required to wear a label that declares them a Muslim? Should they be required to have numbers imprinted as a tattoo on their arm? I think we can figure out where he was going with this, but your religion is just as batshit crazy, number one. Number two, you love to make fun of the women in the burqas. Number one, you love to make fun of them. And number two, you love to say about how it is clearly an oppression of the women, and if the women had a choice, they wouldn't wear those pieces of garment. That's just not true. Now, I agree that the burqas are horrible and disgusting and misogynistic and have all kinds of problems. My problem is not with the wearing of the burqa. My problem is with the mentality that says that men have no control over their sexual lust and behavior, and so therefore it's the women's job to keep themselves under wrap. The Muslim women who wear the veils, who wear the burqas, have said many, many times, I choose to wear this, I want to wear this. And that's fine, because I think they really do. I don't think that they're lying. I think that they are actually saying that they do want to wear it. And the reason why they do want to wear it is the same reason the Gideons want to put a goddamn Bible in every hotel room. It's the same reason why you go to church and pray every Sunday. They have misplaced beliefs. They're confused and they have misunderstandings about how society works, how culture works, and all of these things. And it's deeply ingrained in them that this is what they are supposed to do in order to be a woman. One of the things that happens with the burqa is prepubescent girls in Islam are not required to wear it. It's only when they reach the point of maturity that they are required to cover themselves. And that in and of itself makes it a sign of maturity. The bashing that we do against Islam, the bashing that we do against the burqa, against the Quran, we freaking lit a Quran on fire. What the hell is that? This doesn't help to open the eyes of the entire world to say all of this batshit craziness, all of these beliefs that you have are ridiculous and absurd. You want to make the argument that the Quran is the inspired word of God. You want to make the argument that the Bible is the inspired word of God. That's fine. Without any evidence to substantiate or back any of this up, you're just saying shit. And when you're just saying shit like that, people who are listening who have misheld beliefs and misunderstandings about it go and do bad things. They do it in Islam, they do it in Christianity, they do it in Catholicism, and they, as Josh pointed out, do it in Buddhism as well. So it's religion that's the problem. It's not Islam. And that is my point.
Thank you, Paul. Again, we do love to bash the Muslims, but yeah, a look in the mirror is all it really takes, isn't it? Seriously. What I wanted to do for a quick section here was I was originally going to do a long history of abortion, going all the way back. A real long story, because I like context. Mm-hmm. I like to know what these things are. I was going to mention the first recorded text that contained a method for abortion was from 1550 BCE. It was on Egyptian papyrus. China from 500 BCE.
Ooh, did you find out what it was, though? What was the method for abortion in 1553 BC?
They did not mention what it was, but some of them include binding your abdominal and just, wearing a girdle. A very, very tight girdle for a long time.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, some people had fasting, bloodletting, mixes of egg and dill, mixes of pepper and myrrh, Queen Anne's lace, all kinds of stuff like that. Fun stuff over the years.
The phrase pennyroyal tea comes up in my head, but I don't really know what that is.
Neither do I.
I had heard, and I'm basing this entirely on that Nirvana song. That is my evidence here.
What was it? Nirvana song. It must be true.
Well, yeah, they were prophetic in that manner. But pennyroyalty was, at least according to the research I did when I was 16, listening to Nirvana, was something that they gave women to induce an abortion.
So, I mean, they've been doing it for a very long time. Recently, it's become an issue, but that's only because recently more children have been bad. They've been a detriment. Ancient society, more children the better, because pretty much everybody practiced farming. And when it comes to farming, more hands is better.
Absolutely.
Only recently have we wanted smaller families, and that's why it's actually become a real issue, a real flashpoint. But the problem is, with all of that, there's virtually no data. It's very annoying, and it turns out to be a little boring. So what I did instead was I took a look to find some of the best arguments I could find against abortion.
Okay.
Because again, in a democracy, in a free society, you should be able to do anything you want until somebody can show a reason that it's detrimental, a reason that you can't do it. So I found some, and I'm just going to throw them at you, Paul. These are some of the best reasons that I could find against abortion.
Okay, so I'm gonna determine whether or not I find these to be valid positions. That's what you're saying. Okay,
yes. Okay.
I will ready myself.
So how about...
It's the sound of me readying myself.
Oh, it sounded very dramatic.
Okay.
First off, how about since life begins at conception, abortion is akin to murder?
Oh, okay. Oh, am I to refute that?
Well, you already did.
Yeah, that's my problem.
So you already did in your intersection, but that's one of the best ones. Life begins in conception, therefore abortion is murder.
There's a presupposition there. It's just
that murder's bad.
Well, okay, so there's two suppositions there. The first one being clearly discussed in the journal article we talked about this week. You don't get to start off with a declarative, since life begins at conception, when we can't define what life is. So,
well, we also can't define what humans are, but we have a general consensus on this one. I think we've pretty well refuted this one. Next, since no civilized society permits one human to intentionally harm or take the life of another without permission, abortion should be illegal.
Okay.
So what do you got? Because I've got a couple of things on this one.
Well, I have two arguments against this.
Okay.
One of them is a bit amoral.
All right.
Not immoral, but amoral.
Sure.
And that argument would be, okay, so if you want to take the position that no societies on Earth make it so that you can, I'm sorry, can you state it again just specifically?
No society permits a human to intentionally harm or take the life of another human without punishment.
That's absolutely false.
Well, I could think of duels.
I can think of self-defense.
I could think of the death penalty, which many pro-abortion, many anti-abortion people are pro. It doesn't really mention that, but I'm trying to make these as succinct as possible.
But let's go back to self-defense for a second, because what you need to consider is people get off on self-defense not just when there is immediate danger of loss of life. What I mean by that is if somebody comes at you with a knife and they're going to stab you in the arm, you can shoot them, and you can get off on that as self-defense.
If you have a reasonable fear that your life could be in danger, yes.
Or that harm could come to you to a significant level.
To a significant level, yes.
So a fetus, and this is the amoral position, just to make that clear, a fetus is nothing more than a parasite.
In a way, it actually is.
And so the analogy that no culture allows you to go ahead and murder a person doesn't hold true, because what you're talking about is this position that doesn't exist elsewhere in the world. This position of resources are being taken from your body, and do you have a right to control your own resources? Now, that does lead to a question of the fetus before it is a human, or when it is a human, or if it is a human.
Right.
Is that separate from you? The two positions on that are pretty clear. If it is separate from you, then it is a parasite, and you do have a right to defend yourself. If it is not separate from you, then you retain ownership of it, and you can cut off your finger if you want.
There may be a psychologist or a psychiatrist that would question your capacity to make that determination, but if it is something which would be, if you've got gangrene, and yes, I have just equated a fetus with gangrene. If you have gangrene, you are perfectly reasonable and perfectly intelligent to cut off that limb, under most circumstances, actually, to protect the rest of your body, to protect yourself, your livelihood, your family, that sort of thing. So yeah, I can't really argue with that one. Well, it is a little amoral, a little bit.
Let me take it one step further. I mean,
fantastic.
Your gangrene argument is just fine, but consider that there was a movie with Cuba Gooding Jr. and Robert De Niro, where Cuba Gooding Jr., this was a movie based on a true story, where he was the first black diver in the Navy.
Yes, you know how I like my Cuba Gooding Jr.
Who doesn't? And so he was injured in the course of being a diver, and he had a choice where the divers at that time wore the really heavy suits where they pumped the air hose down and all that, and he broke his ankle, and so they were going to reset his ankle, and he was never going to be able to dive again because the equipment was too heavy, and he couldn't support it on the broken ankle. But what he could do was he could have his leg amputated, and he could support the weight on a prosthetic limb, which is what he did.
That is actually quite a good analogy. That's actually quite good.
I mean, the gangrene carries with it the harm of death, but this is simply he just wanted to continue being a diver.
Right.
So let's
And it's a heroic story where he comes out Fairly good in the wash there.
Wins like the Medal of Honor or something. It's very exciting. So, again, that's my amoral judgment on that position. But please continue.
Okay. Let's see. An abortion can result in medical complications later in life. The risk of ectopic pregnancies doubles, and the chance of miscarriage and pelvic inflammatory disease also increases. Now, I've got some problems with this one, but please, have you got anything? And you do not know what these are already ahead of time, so
no,
off the
I haven't
top
heard
of
these.
your head, can you find any problems with that argument?
Well, I'm going to refute that argument with 2 words.
What's that?
Prove it.
That would be true, and people have attempted. And you know what they've done? They failed.
Yes.
There are a couple of possible things. They used to think that abortions would lead to an increased risk of breast cancer.
Yep.
Somebody hypothesized that due to the cells and the heightened hormones, that sort of thing. Across the board, universally, there is not a single study that showed even ambiguous data. It was studied 5 or 6 times.
Yeah.
Also, there are psychological studies that were done that show that actually all the talk of all the people on TV that seem to really regret the abortion and that sort of thing, they're 2% of the population. 98% of the population suffers no psychological after effect. And a great many people that are forced to raise a child who were not economically, psychologically, or culturally prepared for it do suffer severe psychological damage, as does the child themselves.
Well, yeah, I think that's clear. But okay, so my first point would be prove it. But I do actually have a secondary point to that.
Okay.
The idea that a medical procedure can cause difficulties and complications later in life. So can liposuction.
Yes.
So can eating a Big Mac.
Yes.
Are we going to legislate that these things be illegal? Again, I understand that you're going to quickly pivot, or not you, but the general pro-life person is going to quickly pivot to, but we're talking about a human being, we're talking about a life. No, you're not.
Right, that's not the subject of your argument.
You're making the argument that it's harmful to the mother later in life. And I'm refuting that argument by saying so is a Big Mac. So I think we're done here.
Not to mention the fact that there's not been a single scientific study that supported that.
Right.
But yes, even if there were, you're right. We'd be completely and totally out of luck there. Let's go on. I've got another good one. Abortion should not be used as another form of contraception.
I agree.
I don't.
Okay. All right.
I think that's just a blanket statement. It's not an argument. That's a statement. That's a premise in an argument. I disagree with that premise. I don't think it should. I do not believe that is a factual statement. So that's not an argument.
All right. Well,
that's a statement of opinion. And that's fine. I don't share your opinion necessarily. Even if I do share your opinion, I don't believe that it is evident or axiomic.
Well, yeah, and I mean, really, a statement like that does lead to the fact of, or the position of, okay, so then don't use abortion as a form of contraception. Good for you.
There you go.
And your problem solved. It doesn't really draw into question any of the issues relating to abortion.
Here's another one of the ones that I like. Many Americans who pay taxes are opposed to abortion. Therefore, it's morally wrong to use tax dollars to fund abortion. You got anything on that one?
Yeah.
Because I have one word, it's 3 letters.
All right, well, you go, because it'll be...
War.
Yeah, that's...
There are tons of people that are opposed to war.
I was thinking of...
Morally.
I was thinking of the 3-letter words you could go with. I didn't come up with war. I came up with sex. Wait, no, that doesn't fit.
No, sex does not fit. Many people are opposed to sex.
Yeah.
I believe they're the... I don't know, there's some weird group that doesn't have sex. They're not a growing group. They're shrinking in numbers. But war. Many people have a severe moral opposition to war, to sending people off to kill other people or to die in the name of political boundaries. This doesn't make any sense. Well, so war is my response to that.
Well, it's part of the government's job. It's part of the Supreme Court's job, specifically in the Constitution of the United States, to protect people with minority positions. Mm-hmm. If a majority of your tax dollars are going to fund abortions? Is that what's going on? Because that's actually not the case.
No, it's simply the legality of it. It's not American tax dollars. It's that people are morally opposed to it. Therefore, they shouldn't.
All right. Well, I don't think I can refute that any better than you can. So let's just go on.
We'll move on a little bit. Let's see. Those who choose abortions are often minors or young women with insufficient life experience to understand fully what they're doing. Many have lifelong regrets after. I have lifelong regrets for a great many things I've done. How about you, Paul?
Yeah, I have a couple. One or two.
Yeah,
One or
I
two.
spent a year and a half drinking at Casanova College.
How'd that go for you?
It's fantastic. Long term, not so good. Short term, it was a really good time.
Yeah, well, there's lots of decisions that people make, and I guess the only thing I could say regarding that is that sounds like a problem for education. That sounds like a problem that would be solved by providing people at an early enough age with the requisite knowledge to understand the weight of the decisions that they were making.
I'm sorry, what are they doing? It goes back to assuming that it is inherently bad what they're doing.
Yeah.
They're doing something inherently bad.
Yes.
I don't know why that can just be assumed away in the question. It goes back to the first one, life begins at conception. Well, no, that's not really true at all. I mean, simply because you have a moral opposition to it doesn't mean you can sneak it in as a hidden premise at the beginning of the question.
They try, though.
I'm sorry. I actually think that the best person to get an abortion is someone who hasn't had a chance to actually live their life before they have to start supporting another human being. Somebody who was stupid enough to not have an abortion at the age they should have an abortion is the kind of person who's going to be raising another child. They're going to have the responsibility of another human being. They're going to have to teach them right from wrong. They're going to have to teach them to think, to critically act. They're going to have to teach them to go to school. They're going to have to finish school themselves.
Yeah.
The better educated you are, the better educated your children are, almost exclusively. I mean, this is a terrible, terrible, terrible idea. And it's one of the ones that drives me really up the wall. But we'll just cut it here with my personal favorite.
Okay.
And this one actually, I think, superficially does hold some good solid water. Adoption is a viable alternative to abortion and accomplishes the same result. And with 1.5 million American families wanting to adopt a child, there is no such thing as an unwanted child. So, what do you got there?
Well, and first off, that's just not true, that there's no such thing as an unwanted child. I would point back to organizations like Catholic Charities and their stopping of their adoption program, number one. But I think this goes back to the issue that you were discussing, which is I think that's irrelevant. You're talking about abortion from the perspective that it's wrong and evil. And that's the starting premise on that argument as well.
Yep.
There's risk to a mother during any pregnancy, and there's risk throughout the whole process. And yeah, again, you can go back to well, but it's a human life we're talking about. Well, again, if that's not the premise of your argument, then if you call into question whether it would be safer for a mother to abort or to put the baby up for adoption, it would be in the best interest of the mother's health to have an early, at least a first-term abortion than it would be to put the baby up for adoption. So if you're looking at the health of the mother, and that would be the way to go.
Okay. Those are some of the best ones that I could find. I've got 9-10 pages of them here.
No.
But those are some of the best ones that actually hold the most water, and most of them are pretty easily refuted. The fact that like 97% of teenagers who give birth to children actually, keep the baby, whether or not it's a smart economic, social, or really psychological choice, is irrelevant. You've got the baby. Mm-hmm. You don't want to give that baby up. You start getting optimistic. You think about how beautiful and wonderful it is, and that's true. That's fantastic. But nonetheless, not a good long-term plan. And you knew that when you were thinking rationally. Mm-hmm. Now that you're thinking emotionally, after you've carried something in your body, you've actually been physically connected to it. You felt it move. You felt it grow. It's much harder to give that child up, and we know that from any number of cases where people have adopted children, and the birth mother took the baby back.
Yeah.
Just because I really miss my child, and they mistake postpartum depression, which is fairly natural, with depression from giving up your child and trying to take the child back.
Yeah.
But that's it. Looks like, I believe, Paul, we've got a call on there?
Sure, we got a couple of callers. I know Nurse Jill, apparently. So let's see what Jill has to say. Hi, Jill, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi, Jill, how you doing?
Good. Ed, I just have a couple quick questions for you.
Okay.
My first question is that when you approach such a sensitive topic, I'm just curious why you didn't have some female representation tonight to talk about a female issue. That's my first question. I'm just kind of wondering either side why there wasn't some female perspective, considering it is a female issue.
Okay, I can answer that with 2 points. Number one,
Okay.
Josh and I are both male. And number two, we don't give a shit about sensitive subjects.
Not to mention
Okay.
the fact that we're the same hosts every time. But since you've called in, that's fantastic. Do you have a perspective, something we've overlooked?
I'm sorry?
Do you have a perspective,
I-
a female perspective that we've overlooked?
No, I'm not saying that. I guess I'm just kind of curious. If you don't give a shit about sensitive subjects, then why are you speaking of this one, I guess?
Because we actually care quite a lot about subjects in general. If it's sensitive,
Okay.
well, that's fine, but everything should be discussable. It should be broachable. I mean, there should be no taboos or sacred cows. And granted, both Paul and myself don't have a uterus. We could not grow a child.
This is true.
Nonetheless, there are objective arguments that can be made, which we're trying to make. We try our best to be as well-rounded, but sensitivity doesn't really come into it, largely because, everything should be able to be discussed. I mean, that's
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, I misspoke in saying that we don't give a shit about sensitive subjects. What I intended to say was that we don't give a shit about whether or not a subject is considered by some people to be sensitive in determining whether or not we're going to talk about it. We talk about inflammatory things all the time. And, I think Josh's point is valid. The idea that a particular group, be it men talking about abortion or Westerners talking about Buddhism or however you want to do it, the idea that a particular group does not have the right to discuss these issues because they aren't those issues. I don't believe that anyone is limited in their ability like that to have a discussion. As far as action goes, that's a little bit different, but I don't think there's any harm to Josh and I actually discussing these issues and trying to find out what our positions are and what the research is.
I 100% agree with you, and that's why I'm listening, because I'm appreciating your discussion. I am listening to it. I think that you are making very valid points.
Well, thank you.
I just thought that by giving your viewers a different perspective, the women's perspective would have benefited your listeners, not viewers, I'm sorry, your listeners a little bit more, I think. I think that that's what's lacking, is this perspective tonight.
I think you're right. And if we had a female co-host or we had female callers, such as yourself, that would be great to kind of flesh that out. We, unfortunately, we work with what we have. And we're always happy to have people call in and, certainly offer a perspective that Josh and I aren't able to have.
I have one extra question. I just want you to elaborate on the accidental abortion. I heard that earlier in the show, and I just didn't know what you
Those are
meant by an
miscarriages.
I'm sorry?
They're miscarriages.
Okay.
The American Medical
that's
Association, when they divide things up and they try to figure this out, any early termination during the first 12 weeks technically is an aborted pregnancy. It's not a deliberately aborted pregnancy. So I wanted to put that in there because the statistic I was reading was not the statistic I was initially looking for. And so I did feel obligated to mention that it was accidental, when those are miscarriages. So that includes anything across the board, deliberate or accidental.
And I think that's important to point out because, depending on how you want to collect your data, depending on what kind of argument you make, if you don't tease out something like miscarriages as accidental abortions and simply lump them into the number of abortions that are being made, whether your argument is pro or against, I think biases in the same way that, political pundits and people who do research polls bias their data. So it just seems to be important to break down exactly when somebody mentions there's X number of abortions in America per year. What do they mean by that? Because by some figures, they're including miscarriages in that number, which doesn't make it an accurate representation of the effect of Roe versus Wade.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I understand. Is there any would you like to elaborate any further on I guess, calling the fetus or the aborted baby a cancerous tumor or gangrene. You compared those two. And
that language was a little inflammatory, wasn't it?
Yeah, I love that. Okay.
I'm sorry?
Josh was just saying that yes, we acknowledge that we were using inflammatory language in discussing that. But okay, so you're asking me to elaborate on that. I mean, do you have a problem with the characterization? Is that what you're saying?
I just think that and you were talking very scientifically about the difference between 8 weeks and the fetus when it's 8 weeks versus 12 weeks, and whether a cancerous tumor doesn't have a heartbeat. Mm-hmm. And at 8 weeks you can physically find a heartbeat on a newborn mm-hmm. or on a fetus at 8 weeks. So a cancerous tumor does not have a heartbeat. There are some similarities, but there's no heartbeat. At gangrene, there's really no similarities.
Well, hang on. Let's go back to cancerous tumor just for a second. There are, okay. And you are a nurse, so we'll defer to your medical expertise on this, but there are cancerous tumors that have vascularization, correct?
Yes, that's why I said there are similarities between a growing fetus. There's cells, there is vascularization, there's neurological involvement, of course, but there is no heartbeat, and that's the difference. So I was just trying to clarify, and I think that, and you said that it was in reference to that they show graphic pictures. I think most of the time the reason they're showing those graphic pictures is they're talking about the late-term abortions, and that's what you kind of were. It was in the same discussion about the late-term abortions, and I just wanted to clarify that there is a big difference between the difference of what a cancerous tumor being removed looks like and what a late-term abortion looks like. A late-term abortion happens between what, if I can quote you again, it happens between, is it 18 to 20-something weeks? Is that what we talked about? I'm sorry, I forgot what your
That was you, Josh. I think that's right. Yeah, I think it's pretty close to the figures that he had.
Okay, so in the partial birth abortions or late-term abortions, those babies are full-term. They are not full-term. I'm sorry, but when they come out, they are full-figured. You can see eyes, you can see nose, you can see mouth, and in most hospitals now, they're saving babies that are 20, 23, 24 weeks, and those babies can be born. And a lot of times when moms deliver them, they're actually wanting their babies to live. And so sometimes you'll have on one floor, they'll be performing abortions, and on the other floor, they'll be saving the babies, and they're the same exact week's gestation. So the difference of what they actually look like, I think that's important to really, they're trying to point out a picture for you that, you know what, they do look like real babies, and they don't look like tumors at all.
Okay, well, I know Josh had something to say on this, but I just wanted to say one thing and then let you go forward here. What I'm referring to was the god-awful video that I was forced to watch in catechism on a Wednesday when I was in 8th grade that showed the bloody, dismembered fetus. And it was shown to me in order to elicit an emotional reaction. That is specifically what I'm commenting on.
Okay.
So, Josh?
The problem is there's been back and forth. I know under Clinton they originally outlawed late-term abortion, or what do they call it, partial birth abortion. They brought it back then in 2003, I guess, under Bush. They actually went back through that again, where they made it illegal. They tried to put it constitutional amendment. They eventually the Supreme Court ruled that only under very extreme circumstances were the, quote, partial birth abortion, I'm actually trying to come up with a scientific name for it here, so I apologize if I'm stammering a little bit, would be considered legal. So only under that circumstance if the mother's life was in danger. So it's not really part of the choice idea. The partial birth abortion is not really an option for people. It's not something that's legal in virtually any area. I'm not sure if it's legal anywhere in the country, but it's not really legal anywhere. It's intact dilation and extraction is what it's actually called.
What that means when you read the words intact dilation and extraction, that means that they extract the baby from the uterus intact. That means the baby comes out whole and living, and then they kill it. That's what that means. No,
they actually, to be perfectly blunt, they actually kill it inside the womb. They poke a hole into its head and suck its brain out so that its skull collapses, then they suck it out with a vacuum cleaner. Which is fairly horrible, which is why it's basically illegal in almost every area, if not every area, except under extreme medical conditions.
Okay. I've never heard of the poking a hole in its brain or sucking its brains out. I've never heard that one before.
That's actually how it's done, because by that point, the problem with it is that the skull has begun to form, and the cartilage, which will soon become the skull tissue, actually has hardened, and it's also called intrauterine cranial decompression. They try and dilate the mother as much as they can, and then they cause the skull to collapse. And they cause the skull to collapse by creating a vacuum inside. And the way they create a vacuum inside is to, as horrible as it is to say.
That makes more sense than sucking his brains out.
Yeah, it's kind of horrible to say. Now, keep in mind that that's 0.17% of all abortions in the United States in the year 2000 was under this technique. And that was before Bush and the 2003 law to strengthen the law against the intact dilation and extraction. That was in 2003. This is before the law was enacted to make it virtually impossible to do this. Again, it requires severe risk to the mother. So it doesn't really, I mean, again, that was in 2000. It was 0.17%. So less than 1%, I mean, of abortions were done in this way. And that was, again, prior to the 2003 law. 2004. Yeah, it's no, I apologize. I go back again. It's 2003, the partial birth abortion ban. That's HR 760 S3 was signed into law October 2nd. George W. Bush signed it into law on November 5th, 2003. So since then, the numbers have substantially dropped.
I know you have other callers to get to, and I appreciate you answering my questions, so I will let you move on. I appreciate your conversation and listening to it also. I just really wanted to, ask you those two questions and kind of comment. So well, I appreciate it.
Jill, I'm glad you did, and I think your point is valid, that it would be, certainly more beneficial to us and our listeners to have a female perspective, and you were able to call in and offer that. So that's great. So we really appreciate it.
Okay, you guys have a great night.
All right, thanks.
You too.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
Okay, well, we have another caller who's been holding for a while. Should we move on?
Hello, 307. Are you there?
Hello. Oh, hi. Yeah. Hi. I just wanted to comment on some of the stuff you were saying earlier in the show about the definition of or that the argument that the pro-choice side people try to make that what a fetus is when an abortion takes place, it's not a person, and I want to expound on that a little bit. That
okay.
The scientific definition of life does not actually have any. It does not involve any biologic components per se. It talks about systemic behaviors.
What is the
definition of?
Let me stop you there. Mm-hmm. So you made a declarative there right off the bat, which kind of contradicts the paper we were discussing earlier in the episode. What is the scientific definition of life according to your perspective?
Well, homeostasis, organization, metabolism, growth, adaptation, response to stimuli, and reproduction. And I want to address this in terms of hierarchical complexity. Complexity in the scientific definition of the term, involving component systems that influence each other. And you see these same seven aspects in non-biological systems.
Right. These are the 7 points that are typically presented to like freshman biology students regarding trying to quantify the difference between a rock and a plant.
Sure.
And while these aspects can be applied to a biological level of complexity, they can also be applied to other levels of complexity, the social level of complexity, the economic level of complexity, the chemical level of complexity, and we can see these same aspects defining a system as alive, even though it's not necessarily defined as being biological. And when you're talking about cells within a womb, yes, those cells at the cellular level of complexity, they are alive. They satisfy these 7 components. However, the collection of cells, the what we call a fetus or an embryo, is not technically alive. It can't, as an organism, necessarily reproduce. I mean, a human being cannot reproduce until adolescence. And so on the organism level of complexity, it does not necessarily satisfy all the requirements of being a living system.
Okay. Well, I think the reproduction argument is a little spurious, but I would say the strongest argument against that, according to the 7 tenets that you've laid out, would be homeostasis, being that a fetus in its process of development is entirely dependent on, as Josh and I phrased before, being a parasite off of the mother. So it doesn't fulfill the requirement of homeostasis, meaning you cannot take that fetus out of the womb and have the fetus survive as it is.
Exactly, and that can even be applied to an infant, because it still requires a level of external input in order to maintain its survivability.
I'm sorry.
On that level,
I don't want to. Can I interrupt you there? And just to play the devil's advocate, I'd like to argue against both you and Paul.
Satanist,
yes, that's what I am. I'm a horrible, wicked person. It occurs to me that. That's the environment. And if we're considering this to be, let's say we assume that it is a creature, because, I mean, it's going through cellular reproduction, it's doing any number of things. If its environment is the womb, isn't it sort of just like, again, if you want to go back to it being a parasite that lives inside your body? Or for that matter, we live inside the atmosphere. You remove us from our environment and we immediately die. You could say that creature lives there. That's where it lives. And regardless of its neural complexity, it is a being of some level, and it simply is living within an environment. The environment happens to be the uterus of a human being. That's irrelevant. It's a being living in that environment.
You're forgetting about waste. See, a human body, after it is born, reaches a homeostasis with the environment wherein it inspires oxygen, expires carbon dioxide, and it has this balance of metabolism, processes food, produces waste, and moves the system on. A fetus in a uterus, basically, the best way to phrase that would be it takes more from the environment than it gives back, which is different than a human being in homeostasis in the environment.
Well, I mean, we do grow,
yes,
which means we need to inherently consume more than we take in. Otherwise, we would be at perfect homeostasis, and a child grows up, which means they take in more calories than they either spend through action or excrete through waste. I mean, they take in more calories, so they are taking in more. So human beings do this during childhood.
Right, and if I'm remembering correctly, even the human brain does not finish maturing until around the age of 25. So, I mean,
it doesn't really solidify into a basic, fairly static whole, and even then it's not particularly static, but a fairly static whole until the mid-20s, you're right, that's true.
Or longer.
But, depending on the person.
This can also be... Go ahead.
No, don't worry about it. Just making a joke. Go ahead.
But at the same time, a fetus or an infant can be viewed in terms of it being a component of a social organism. If you stop looking at the human, if you stop looking at the human being as the level of complexity for life and start looking at the social organism, if you start looking at a family or a tribe or a nation as the living entity, and the humans within it are the organs and the cells that make up this living system.
We're all part of Gaia and Mother Earth. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm not going to touch on that one, but you can look at a fetus in terms of its contribution to a social entity. In which case, if you look at in subsistence level cultures, where more hands make light work, where more children can be a good thing, or looking at it into an advanced culture or an overpopulated culture where having more children is actually a bad thing. And so that a fetus can actually become the social equivalent of a cancerous cell for a social organism. where it will, if this fetus is born and allowed to grow and propagate, the social organism is going to suffer detrimental effects.
Let me just stop you right there for a second. Are you aware that you're advocating the wholesale slaughter of homeless people? Are you aware of that? Are you aware of the social engineering aspect of what you're putting forth here, saying that we should take whatever life forms are a burden on society and eliminate them from that society?
Unfortunately, I am aware of that.
Okay, all right.
In that,
as long as you're playing along, that's fine.
Well, I call it unfortunate because I do recognize within my own personal philosophies viewpoints that can be considered inflammatory. I don't advocate rounding people up and shipping them off to concentration camps or anything like that. But what I do try to acknowledge is that a social ideology cannot stop a biological reality. The biological reality is that people are going to continue to have sex, and no amount of advocating religious or ideological viewpoints is going to stop that biological reality.
Unless those ideological viewpoints include forced sterilization.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly.
I'm not advocating forced sterilization.
I didn't know. I wasn't suggesting you were.
What I am advocating is the necessity. What I am advocating is the necessity for an outlet, meaning that we don't want to have to. I don't want people to have abortions, but if we still need to have the capacity to do so. If that makes any sense. I don't.
I think, on a pragmatic sense, you're entirely correct. The argument's been made a couple of times by both Josh and I that if you do something like make abortion illegal, you're only going to increase the amount of problems associated with getting an abortion, including botched abortions, medical difficulties. Because abortion, whether it be illegal or legal, is not going to go away. Alcohol didn't go away during Prohibition. Last time I checked, it would take me about 12 hours and 2 phone calls to get a bag of pot. So I don't think that, making these things illegal is ridiculous if the idea is prevention of it. It's just not effective. It's not effective with abortion. It's not effective with Prohibition. It's not effective with drug prohibition. It's not effective with many things.
That's Paul the Libertarian talking. I differ in opinion somewhat. I mean, the more difficult you make something, the less common you make it, the more expensive you make it, and the more dangerous you make it.
I hate you.
If we go back to Prohibition, let's ignore alcohol, because everybody was drinking during Prohibition.
Yeah.
Marijuana, there are actually, to this day, less, but there are still gang wars that are fought and turf wars that are fought over distribution rights to a certain marijuana network. It still happens. It raises the cost and it raises the economic benefits. I mean, if you got a doctor that performs abortions, he can kind of charge whatever he wants if they're illegal. And he can rake you through pull you over the coals. What I do find interesting is that your comment, first off, it sounds like you're pro-abortion, but you don't really like the idea. Which is something that's shared by Paul and myself. I remember when I was probably 22, it was during a period where there was a big anti-abortion thing going on, and I was, jumping on and defending the pro-choice perspective and doing all this stuff, and did that, everywhere because that was the topic that came up. I had a family friend that, their daughter came and they all asked, we don't have a car. Could you give us a ride to the thing to get the abortion? And my answer had to be no. And while that seemed to confuse them, I mean, my problem is I don't have a good argument against abortion. I certainly don't have one that would stand up to any kind of logical or legal scrutiny. I don't like it. You have every right in the world to do it. I can't come up with a reason, and you need a good reason to make something illegal. I don't have one. but I don't like it. I'm not going to participate. I think you have the right to do it, and I think it's the same thing with gay sex. I'm not going to have the gay sex. You have every legal right to do it. I'm not going to participate. That's not what I do.
But I think the question is, if I wanted to go have the gay sex, would you give me a ride?
Well, that does change things. It does change things. If you wanted to go have the gay sex, I would give you a ride.
Well, then
I'm pro-sex in general.
All right,
I'm not pro-medical procedures in
You're
general.
not pro-medical procedures in general?
No, I'm not. I have problems with just the willy-nilly use of medical procedures to solve everyday problems. So,
well, I apparently am pro-medical procedure in general this month.
Recently, that does seem to be the case.
All right. Well, do you have anything else to add?
I think that's it for right now. Though I did just want to say I certainly approve of the comparison of the insurance options for abortion and that being put into the public arena and comparing that to the fact that we publicly subsidize the wholesale slaughter of Iraqi and Afghani civilians for the past decade or so. So I just wanted to say I found that particularly apropos.
Yeah,
Yes.
you don't. A democracy does not mean that you get what you want, even if you and a pure democracy maybe, but our particular governmental system does not mean that you get what you want if you get enough people on your side. I don't care if 97% of Americans believe in creationism and intelligent design. It doesn't make it true. So, all right. Well, we're gonna move on. Probably argue about something stupid, and we'll see what happens from there. But thanks for giving us a call, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good time. Since this is a strong subject, one that has sucking out babies' brains, that sort of thing.
Really, you just stopped and you went, well, actually.
I did some research on this. It seems kind of horrible. I was like, oh my god, that's terrible.
Yeah,
but that's actually what they do. They dilate the cervix so they can get up in there.
That's what I learned in my physiology class because the cervix can't get big enough to actually give they have to smush down. We have the bigger cranium, and that's why birth is more difficult for humans than it is for.
Keep in mind that thing starts growing by millimeters. That's a big transformation that the woman's body goes through, and it takes a little while for that to actually occur.
Yeah.
You don't do that on a whim. It takes like 3 or 4 days, by the way, to open up the cervix enough.
That's what I
hear.
hear.
Even perform the.
It would take even longer for mine.
Yeah, I bet it would.
So before we go on, I just wanted to point out, because I think it's hilarious, Government Jeff commented that the Founding Fathers knew better than to allow Athenian direct democracy. That's coming from the government.
Government Jeff.
From the government.
Although, just not to be Captain serious on that subject, if you think about the fact that Athenian democracy, so like something like 20% of the populace were considered citizens.
Right. Yeah.
That's only 20% of the people got to vote, I mean, I'm just saying, it's much easier when only a fifth of people get to vote to actually have direct democracy.
That does seem to make sense, yeah.
And that's really nothing more than just referendumism. Everything's a referendum.
Sure. Well, how many people vote in the average presidential election nowadays? It's like
46 to 52%.
It's almost half.
Yes. All right, but now, since we had a bit of a hefty topic this week, Paul and I decided we were going to have ourselves an argument about something equally serious and equally impactful on everyday lives.
Okay.
The question is, what is more likely, Bigfoot or Yeti? I'm going to refer to him as the Bigfoot and the Yeti.
Sure.
Because I don't believe Bigfoot is his name. And Bigfoot was his name.
That's exactly right. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Okay, flip your stupid coin.
All right, how are we calling this?
I'd say let's go with Tails takes the Yeti.
Oh, why is the Asian one? Why does the Asian one have to be Tails? Why is that?
Because I'm a racist.
And you'll notice nobody here talked about the Sasquatch. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Again, the Native Americans get shat upon. Whitey.
Well, Tails takes the Yeti. I'll take the coin.
Okay. It's heads.
All right, so I am arguing for the existence of Bigfoot.
Bigfoot as opposed to the Yeti.
Yes, because clearly the Yeti's ridiculous. I mean,
ridiculous.
Absolutely absurd. Bigfoot, however, in the Pacific Northwest, where Bigfoot is purported to exist, there's a large area of unexplored and not unmapped, but there's a number of animal and plant and fungus, protozoan species that exist out there in the Pacific Northwest that have yet to be discovered by scientists. So the idea that there could be an animal out there that scientists simply have yet to stumble across because scientists, specifically biologists who aren't real scientists anyway, just blindly bumble around in the woods until they come across something and go, oh, that's a butterfly I've never seen before. So clearly, it's possible that a Bigfoot exists, but that does not refute the claim that Bigfoot is more likely than the Yeti. I will say, though, that the Yeti is incredibly unlikely because the Yeti is purported to habitate in the Himalayan mountains. Mm-hmm. It's too cold. It's simply too cold. Don't be ridiculous. Bigfoot's more likely.
All right, you've put down some fairly reasonable points. I do want to say, though, first off, Asia, largest continent on the planet. Also, largest unpopulated areas. North America has huge sections of populated areas. We have loggers, we have oil drillers, we have, have you seen ice road truckers?
I have.
They've got all that stuff. That sort of thing does not occur in Asia. Now, the Yeti in Asia, in the Himalayan mountains, this is the sort of area, this is sort of habitat where they could duck and dodge. I mean, you find random bones. They say they're bears. I don't know. It seems to me it's just as likely that they're a man-like creature, a very close relative. Now, that being said, the problem that I have, and the real difference between the Yeti, which clearly exists, and the Sasquatch, or excuse me, the Bigfoot, which is preposterous.
What, are you trying to cheat now?
First off, the Bigfoot, I'm not even sure is it just a creature with big feet? I know what a Yeti is. A Yeti is an ape-like, bear-like creature who lives in the Himalayan mountains. We can all agree upon that because we know that it lives there. The Bigfoot, on the other hand, is this, I mean, okay, we've got a lot of technology here in this country, and we've seen lots of video and lots of footage of Bigfoot, and it's all been refuted. How many times have you seen video of Yeti? You don't see video of the Yeti. And I'll tell you why. Okay. They're stealthy. But that also means that you don't ever refute the evidence, which means that we can fairly certainly say that the evidence for the Bigfoot is unreasonable. Okay. Since there is less evidence for the Yeti, we cannot make that determination. So while one is incredibly unlikely, the other, but it's still gray. We don't know one way or the other if the Yeti is likely or not, which makes it statistically more probable. And again, I add into that the fact that there's a there's a barren wasteland almost the size of North America in the middle of Asia where the Yeti can be going back and forth.
You're cheating, but I'm not going to hold you to that. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions.
All right.
Do you believe in Zeus?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to ask you again, but I want you to actually answer the question. Do you believe in Zeus?
I do.
Poseidon?
I do.
Yahweh?
I do.
You believe in all these things?
Well, I do. They're clearly characters written about in stories. I also believe in
like the Yeti. The Yeti is nothing more than a mythological name. Now look at Bigfoot. There is no mythological name attached to Bigfoot. Bigfoot's moniker comes specifically from the evidence presented to the people who have explored the area.
All refuted.
It was a footprint. It was a big footprint.
Refuted.
It is clearly the most scientific name that's been laid out. And you, sir,
do you know what Yeti means in English?
You're living in nothing more but myths and legends, whereas
do you know what the word Yeti means?
Fact.
I'm sorry, you're saying this based upon a linguistic argument. Do you know what the word Yeti means?
No, I do not.
Neither do I, but that clearly defeats your argument. You're suggesting that the word Bigfoot actually means something. It's named after something, but the word Yeti doesn't. Well, you don't know that to be true. You're making a statement that is inherently false, even if you turn out to be correct. You're pulling out of your behind.
I'm saying that Bigfoot's monikers come simply based upon the available information and evidence. And you have nothing. Oh, and by the way, your little argument to say that, all of Asia, no, you're talking about a very small area of the Himalayan mountains. You don't just get to spread it out. If you want to say all of Asia, I will say all of North America. But I don't. I say the Pacific Northwest, where
think about mainland Asia. Don't consider China or any of the islands. If you look at mainland Asia, the vast majority, I'm talking the billion people that live in China, all live on the coast. In the United States, the same is true. But North America, the same is true. North America is, first off, not as big, and second, more industrialized and had a larger agrarian society to begin with, which means we have explored a larger percentage of the available land where Bigfoot could be than they have in Asia where Yeti could be.
And that's fine. And the argument that you're making is, I would say parallel to, I'm going to guess the ontological argument, but I could be incorrect. Basically, here's the point. You've just argued that Bigfoot is clearly better at hiding, stealth, and subterfuge than the Yeti. Now, what would be better at hiding, stealth, and or subterfuge?
Well, this is where we're going.
An animal that exists, or an animal that doesn't even exist, who could not possibly have these skills? Clearly,
Let me ask you something. Do you see the dragon in this room?
A Bigfoot that exists would clearly be better at hiding than a Bigfoot that didn't exist.
I actually would say that's not true, because a Bigfoot that did exist would actually have hurdles to overcome, whereas a Bigfoot that did not exist would have no hurdles to overcome.
Right. Ha! Absolutely, I fully agree. And the fact that Bigfoot could overcome those hurdles makes it inherently better. Yes.
I'm going to say the Yeti wrestles bears. Does the Bigfoot wrestle bears?
Yes. You know how many black bears there are in the Pacific Northwest?
A lot, because they don't wrestle Yetis. If they wrestled Yetis, they would clearly lose. And since there are so many bears in the Pacific Northwest, I'd have to say clearly evidence that there is no Bigfoot wrestling them. How many bears are there in the Himalayan mountains?
I would say 17.
There's very few, because bears cannot survive well in that habitat. Clearly, no competition for the Yeti. Therefore, the ecological niche they both hold, the Yeti has the advantage, which means evolutionarily, were both to exist, it's much more likely the Yeti would continue to exist rather than the Bigfoot, which would not. So Bigfoot's being clearly extinct. I'm not saying they didn't exist and these footprints didn't come from somewhere. I'm simply suggesting that the evidence shows that they're obviously extinct.
I was actually going to wrap this up, but I cannot let this absurdity of your final point stand. Clearly, you've made the point that bears do not exist where the Yeti is purported to reside. And I would just ask you a very simple question. Mm-hmm. What's the food source for a Yeti? Because Bigfoot
goats.
Is a bear-eaten...
Mountain goats.
So mountain goats. Like, mountain goats are going to offer enough nutrition to substantiate a Yeti. In that kind of cold environment, with those kind of caloric needs and intake...
First off...
Yeah?
The white bears that I've forgotten, the polar bears.
Yeah.
Polar bears subsist in much the same way the Yeti does.
Yep, they eat
a lot of, exactly, and the Yeti eats the mountain goat.
How many seals?
Are at least moderately non-combative. The mountain goat, all you have to do is grab him by the horns, give him a quick snap, you've broken his neck. Now you've got dinner for like 3 days. Unlike the Bigfoot, who would have to fight a bear, which is vicious, a moose, which is like a mountain goat on steroids, or a mountie. A mountie. Have you ever tried to fight a mountie for a meal? They're starving up there. Plus, they get hit by all those trucks on ice road truckers.
And they speak in 2 different languages.
Well, not over there. They don't.
Well, okay. I think
only if the Bigfoot were over on the other coast. Come on now.
I think we should wrap this up. I think your position is clear. The Himalayan mountains are populated with seals. That makes a lot of sense. And clearly Bigfoot is basically akin to Superman. I think we've resolved this issue.
Superman with really big feet.
Well, yeah. Of course, he's Bigfoot.
Well, yeah, that's all I'm saying.
All right. Well, we want to know what you think. I'm sure you'll have lots to say on that. So email us at reason@wnyatheist.org.
Yes, reason@wnyatheist.org.
All right.
Now,
I have no idea who the hell the Yeti is. He's like white, right? Was he in that movie with the elf from who wanted to be a dentist?
Wow, have you taken?
No, I'm relatively
Have they
sober.
given you really cool prescription drugs? Is that what happened? Because
Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and then there's Hermie who wants to be a dentist. Somebody's got to find me here at some point. Hermie wants to be a dentist.
Do you mean Rudolph and the Island of Lost Toys?
Yes.
Misfit Toys?
Yes.
Yeah, I've never seen that.
There was a Yeti in there.
It was a Yeti? That wasn't a Bigfoot?
It was white. I assume Yeti is white.
Okay, in all seriousness, Paul and I, neither of us did any research whatsoever for this segment. All this was things that we knew off the top of our heads. I will say that in my childhood, when I was very interested in mythological creatures, Bigfoot is very bear-like. He looks a lot like he's huge. He's stoic. He's got a big head. The Yeti, on the other hand, is a much smaller head with almost a point to it, a ridge across the top. It's kind of like
this is very specific.
I'm serious, and they're a light beige, so that during the winter months they become white because they melt into the snow environment. During the summer months they become a bit browner or beigeier, whereas Bigfoot is in theory brown all year long. And part of what I have for Bigfoot does come from Harry and the Hendersons. That may not be entirely accurate, but if you look at the video they have of Bigfoot,
he does
looks
look
a lot like the Bigfoot from Harry and the Hendersons.
We can call him Harry.
We can, because he is.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's another episode of Reason Podcast. Do you have a quote for us this week, Josh?
I most certainly do not.
All right.
I did, but it appears to have eluded me, so...
I sent you a quote that I was happy with, and I lost it myself. So
yes, I could not pull up your quote. I was depending on your quote for being the quote, and since I couldn't pull up your quote, I damn you and I curse you. And once again, you have doomed me and damned me with your technological difficulties.
That is nothing unusual.
Or we can say the quote right now.
Go ahead.
When it comes to social mobility, which is the American dream, the ability of one generation to do better than the people who spawned them, we're 10th in the world. We're 10th in the American dream. That's like Mexico. That's like Mexico.
Just keep saying that's like Mexico.
I intend to. That's like Mexico being 10th in the Mexican hat dance. Bill Maher.
That was me hitting my head against the desk.
Yes, indeed. Yes, technology. God is punishing us severely.
Yeah.
Severely for our atheism. This is proof positive.
That is apparently the case. Yes. All right. Well, thanks for staying with us to the bottom of another episode of Reason. We're at 32 minutes and 30 seconds. So, no, that's no. We're at an hour and 32 minutes and 30 seconds.
I
can do math, which still is under 45 minutes. So
exactly. So. Until next time, Paul?
Yeah, next week we're going to be talking about religion in politics, which is kind of a broad, wide open field. So I'm sure we'll do plenty of research and have lots of exciting things to say. All right, until next week, farewell.
Hasta lasagna.